Let's talk about Keemstar. So, for those who don't know, there's a bunch of allegations right now where Jake Paul is concerned, and I'm less concerned about those, not because I don't think that we need to have conversations about the victims and everything else, and not that we don't need to be respecting everybody's privacy and ability to function in situations involving sexual assault. But I'm less concerned with that conversation right now because I have not looked fully into everything where that whole drama is concerned. Also, thank you very much, Quibble's Lover of Coffee, for becoming a follower. Now, the conversation that I want to have right now is about a misunderstanding that I think a lot of people have about how sexual assault functions, about how it can happen, and what options some people have during, I guess really the insensitive way of saying it is the act. So we're going to go ahead and go straight to Keemstar. This is straight from his Twitter. And we're going to be talking about the ideas presented here. I'm not going to be doing anything like calling Keem a gnome or anything like that. Again, I'm less concerned with the individual actors involved right now and more concerned with this conversation, because this conversation is something that happens a lot when we're talking about sexual assault. So there's your content warning. We are talking about sexual assault. If that is something that you are incredibly uncomfortable with, I can completely understand that. But it is nonetheless the topic we are diving into head first. Let's go ahead and click that video.
Hey guys, I need to report today on the Jake Paul sexual assault allegations. And quite frankly, I do not believe the alleged victim.
Okay, so not believing the victim right now is... I understand there's a believe all victims thing that we have to have in the back of our minds, but at the same time, starting from a position of skepticism is okay. But that's not the reason why Keem is doing this, and I think that that will be made clear throughout the video. Again, when it comes to sexual assault, the time to believe stuff, generally speaking, as far as the courts are concerned, is when sufficient evidence has been presented. Believe all victims does not necessarily mean believe all victims and, remove due process. That's not what it means. It's more of just accepting the fact that most people tend to default to denial where victims of sexual assault are concerned. And we need to break ourselves out of that habit. That does not mean that you start going through the accusing process and going through everything. Believing all victims is more of a personal thing. You personally taking somebody's account seriously instead of just dismissing it and throwing it under the rung. Castro points out it's more hear them out. Yeah, it is more hear them out. At the very least, give victims the benefit of listening to their story instead of just going, oh, you think that your uncle assaulted you 12 years ago? That's bullshit. Instead of just, doing that, which tends to happen a lot. So, let's go ahead, Keem, enlighten us on why you are skeptical. Again, skepticism is not necessarily a bad position to take here, but let's see why he is.
And I don't want to just cover this real quick on Drama Alert without getting some pushback. Maybe there's something I'm missing. Maybe I'm not seeing a certain angle to the story. That's why I'm making this Twitter video, so I can be challenged before I put it on Drama Alert in front of millions of people.
All right, so consider this our opportunity to challenge Keem together as a community, as best we can. This is assuming he ever watches this video, which is probably not going to happen. But, Keem, if you do watch this, hi, I'm not the biggest fan of yours.
But this girl is claiming that Jake Paul, was kissing her, holding her hand, led her to her room. She didn't want to do any further stuff with him. And then Jake Paul, grabbed her head and started fucking her face. And within 30 seconds, busted a nut in her mouth. And she claims that she was sexually assaulted. Now, how does that happen?
Okay, so, oh boy, there is an idea presented here, and that is that you don't understand how a sexual assault can happen. And we're going to go ahead and take Keem, we're going to give benefit of the doubt, we're going to go ahead and take him super seriously, we're going to go ahead and pretend that this is definitely a good faith conversation. I have no way to know if that is the case. I have no way to know if he's being good faith, but I think it's a good idea to just pretend he is for a second, okay? So, how can something like this happen? That's the question presented. So, let's say that you and a friend, this is a friend that you trust, and you go into their room. Now, how many things could you be doing in somebody's room? Well, it's not just sex. Like, I've had people in my room, my office, areas of my house. Hell, my office has a couch in here that can turn into a bed. You want to call it a bedroom? It can technically be that. I've had people of the opposite sex here who are friends, and nothing has come of it. And these are people who are, opposite sex. Nothing comes of that, because that's not my goal when I'm bringing somebody in my office. Usually it's showing them something that I have, hanging out in some way, shape, or form. It's not immediate thought, hey guys, let's go ahead and jump right into the sack. That's not generally a thing that happens. I don't have a reason to. So, what should you be able to do as an adult in a situation like this? You should be able to trust another adult with a functioning brain, ideally functioning empathy, hopefully. You should be able to trust them so that if you say, no, you don't want to do something, you just want to hang out, that's perfectly fine. If you go into somebody else's private house, that does not give them carte blanche ability to do with you and your body what they want. Now, maybe Keem is wondering on a physical level, how does this happen? And the answer is pretty simple. If you're a guy who can overpower someone, it's not hard. Or even if you can't really overpower someone, but you are in such a position of power and influence that you can get somebody to do something that they don't necessarily consent to, these are all things that can be done. And Jake Paul is not exactly a scrawny guy. He's got some power to his build and frame. But again, I'm less concerned with the individual actors here and more concerned with the argument. Let's go ahead and hear more of what Keemstar has to say here, because my position right now is that two adults going into a scenario should have enough empathy, should have enough ability to assert any situation they're in and recognize if the other is uncomfortable or if the other does not want to do something. And if they don't, then it's largely going to be the fault of the individual who pushes the other one. So, Keem, let's go ahead and hear your reasoning.
I like, what? Wouldn't she have to open her mouth and participate?
All right. So, first problem. This is a misunderstanding of sexual assault that happens a lot. The idea that it always takes two to tango. This makes it to where functionally no guy can rape a person ever. If he doesn't think that sexual assault in the mouth can happen, and that you have to actively participate for it to happen, then we should go ahead and throw out a majority of all of the abuse cases towards the Catholic Church. Because at that point, you're assuming that if a guy sexually assaults another guy, it can't happen as long as it's in the mouth. You think that oral rape, basically, can't happen. But it can. The jaw is not a perfect mechanism. You can unlodge it. Also, did not mean to cough there. Also, I'm going to be a little graphic here. Let's say there's a scenario where you are just taking your finger. I'm not going to paint this hypothetical with other extremities because that's a bit graphic and YouTube will probably crap on my entire channel if I do that. But let me paint you a scenario. You've got a friend of yours, let's even say they're a significant other, and they close their mouth. And so you take your finger and you try sticking it in their mouth. Can you get it through their lips? Probably. It's not the most difficult thing to do. Can you get it past the teeth? Well, yeah. Again, it's not the most difficult thing to do, especially if you're worried about hurting someone else. If I were to take a very sensitive part of me and put it near somebody else's teeth, and try to push it through, there might be a part of that person that goes, well, I don't want to hurt you. This is uncomfortable for me. This is bad for me. This is horrible for me. But I don't want to hurt you. so I'm not going to do that. They don't consent to you forcing through. The mere fact that you were successful in forcing whatever extremity through somebody's mouth, that does not suddenly mean that you consented to it. It doesn't suddenly mean that it's okay for you to do that. The key word is still point.
Never look a tulip in the eye.
Yeah, censor in the chat says, okay, point. Just because you're not consenting to a thing doesn't mean you're ready to injure another person either. You could be too surprised or just not willing to hurt someone at all. That is 100% reasonable. That's kind of my point. Wonder Greek, thank you very much for the follow. Let's get back into Keem's dialectic here.
In some way for that to happen? Like, can't you just turn your head, or can't you just get, like, is there some way to force oral sex on someone?
Yes, there is. The scenario that I laid out just a second ago is literally a way to force oral sex on someone without their consent. If someone does not want to injure you, and if this person was willing to, sit down and kiss Jake, then yeah, they might not want to injure him. But they still might not consent to him forcing himself on them. But then you have the two extremes there. Do I hurt this person? Or do I just let the thing happen and get it over with, even though I don't want it, I don't consent to it? It's not good. Now, there's another angle to this, too, that needs to be considered. Consider the build of the individual in a scenario like this. Consider how much damage they could potentially do to you. Now, I want you to consider, for a moment, put your feet in the shoes of a muscular, powerfully built person. Now, what happens if you get hurt by another individual? What's the snap decision that you have? Usually, for most people, it's hurt them back. It's either some form of retreat or hurt them back. But if they're in Jake's bedroom, retreat's not going to be the first thing he defaults to. It's going to be hurt them back. So, let's consider that you, in your brilliant self-defense, decide to hurt someone in one of the most painful ways possible to get them to stop. While, yes, this may stop the sexual assault in the immediate, does this not also create a scenario where this person is going to lash out at you? Potentially do you a lot of physical damage? And again, remember, this is a person in a position of great power, wealth, and influence. You're going to have an uphill battle proving that this was not your fault in the first place if it comes down to a domestic affair. I'm not saying that all of these considerations necessarily go through a victim's mind at the time, but these are things that you have to consider from the outside in. You have to consider that there are people who will not go so far to defend themselves because they know it would hurt someone else, and also because they know that by hurting someone else, they open the door for them to hurt them further. At this point, someone would have to accept the fact that they've got two options. If they're in a room with someone and they are not functionally able to leave, we don't know the entire story there, and they're being forced into doing something, their worst case scenario options might just be sexual assault and domestic assault, or just sexual assault. None of these options are great, but if you're in a lose-lose situation, you tend to take the lesser of the two evils. And these are things that have to be considered there. And again, we have to assume that Keem is arguing in good faith. You might not have to assume that, but I have to assume it for the purpose of the conversation. Keem, if you legitimately don't think that oral sexual assault is possible, then you're going to have to argue against the vast majority of trauma cases that involve oral sexual assault. You're going to have to argue against the vast majority of legal cases that involve the Catholic Church and little boys. You're going to have such an uphill battle merely because you can't conceptualize somebody being in a situation that is lose-lose and being forced to use their body for someone else's benefit. But there's another angle to this, a very important one. What he's engaging in is also a bit of a fallacy. This is an argument from ignorance. He cannot position himself in a way where he considers that the victim was sexually assaulted because he's arguing from ignorance as to whether or not a sexual assault in the mouth can even happen without the other willingly participating. This is fallacious, and it's also just an incredibly naive way to view the physicality between two individuals. We still got half the video to go, though. Let's see if Keem redeems it in the second half.
I mean, she's not saying that he had a weapon and was like, you better do this. You know, she is saying that he grabbed her head and started fucking her face and came in her mouth.
So, okay, let's go ahead and take that scenario at face value, Keem. That's a terrible joke and pun. I did not mean for that to come out there. That one is also bad. You know what? I'm going to stop while I'm ahead. That one's also bad. If it weren't for the gutter, my brain would be homeless, and this is the absolute worst time for any of those puns to be popping through. This is terribly inappropriate. Let's stay on topic, brain, please. So, let's consider a couple of factors. One, can a victim be surprised in a scenario where their head is grabbed and they're forced down into an area? Also, I just want you guys to just do a thing here. If you have hair at the back of your head, I want you to grab it. Now, there is likely, if you grab it and you just have a relaxed jaw, you'll notice something. If you pull the hair and your jaw is relaxed, there is a chance that it will open a little more. Whether it be in pain or what have you, doesn't matter. The functional thing is, it is possible to grab the back of somebody's head and, in surprise, their mouth to open. And if Jake is in fact the half-minute warrior that is being argued that he is, then 30 seconds of consideration while the act is happening, that time goes by blindingly fast. You're going to argue from a point where you can look back in the past and go, didn't she have all these options available? She might have. Turning her head, anything that you want to consider. If we grant all of those things, she might have had those options available, but would the victim consider those options in that scenario when there's only 30 seconds of time, and there's an amount of time that you have to take to get over the shock and surprise? Your brain's fight or flight mechanisms are not instantaneous. Keem, you've got an uphill battle here. And I want to take you in good faith. I want to deconstruct this problem. I want to have a conversation here for people who might have the same views on sexual assault that you do, that it takes two to tango, and therefore any amount of assault that happens in a particular way is invalid or isn't real, or any number of dumb takes like that. There are people who probably look at this, look at your content, and go, yeah, I agree with that. Those are the people I want to speak to, because I don't think this is going to make it to Keem. If it does make it to Keem, I don't think it's going to change his mind. There are people who believe, as Prince Morgan just pointed out in the chat, there are people who believe that a woman's body cannot get pregnant from rape because it has magical internal mechanisms that determine whether or not they truly wanted to do something at that time. And apparently the person who said that, according to Centra, was a politician who writes laws, who has the ability to influence legislation. There are real people right now who have influence, who believe things along the lines of what Keem believes, and those things lead to more people getting assaulted. Because in the world where people accept that the victim's not going to be believed, they're not going to be taken seriously, what have you, it's much easier for people to get hurt in those worlds. And we have some measure of direct control over what kind of world we actually engage in, what kind of world we create. So, Keem, more points from the peanut gallery, please.
I don't understand the physics here. Like, I don't understand how that's possible. Like, why? Like, can't you get away? Is there really no way to get away?
So, there are several scenarios in which a person is sexually assaulted, raped, what have you, where they might have had options to get away. But again, they might not be in a position to consider those options. They could be in shock. What matters now is not, did she have options to escape? What matters most here, Keem, is, did she consent? And if the answer is no, and Jake did not, if we assume that Jake did not accept her no, then yeah, this is assault. This is bad. You can argue against the physics all you want, but even pointing out the physical issues, as we've done before, another angle to this is the societal ones. Once you say no, it doesn't matter if somebody successfully goes through the Superman 64 level loops it requires to get inside your body. If you said no to them being inside your body, that's the end result. That's it. That's all that matters. That's it. It does not matter whatever physical loop somebody had to go through. All that matters is that they said no, and somebody did not accept that. But again, even arguing over the physical areas, you mentioned, did he have a weapon aimed at you? Keem, Jake's fists are weapons. He's done professional level boxing. That argument doesn't matter. I grew up in a very violent neighborhood. Most fights there did not happen with guns or switchblades. Most fights there happened with fists, because everybody knew everyone else was armed and no one wanted to escalate. Because people didn't want to die over their petty disputes. Fists are weapons, Keem. I can't control if yours aren't.
Is there really no way to just close your mouth, like, and just not let the penis enter your mouth? Like, I'm sorry, but I just don't believe this story at all. Am I missing something here?
Yes, you're missing a lot of things. You're missing the social power dynamic between the two. You're missing the fact that a jaw can be opened in surprise. You're missing the fact that if somebody is pushing forever and you don't have a reasonable way out, you can't think of a reasonable way out, you may just give in, not because you legitimately consent to something, but because that is the easier option that involves you taking less pain, less humiliation, at least in your estimation at the time. And there's also the option that somebody might not have considered all their options because these are surprising things, and apparently if it takes 30 seconds for Jake to bust a nut, that's not a lot of time to consider your options. That's maybe enough time for your fight or flight response to kick in full and you to realize what happens. Not to mention, there are situations where people don't even realize they were sexually assaulted until after the fact because somebody has to talk to them and actually contextualize things for them. There's a lot of factors here that you aren't considering. You know what, Game? Just bring me onto your show. Just bring me on a drama alert to explain this shit to you, because apparently you don't understand it. And I'm not trying to be a dismissive asshole, and I know that's how I'm coming across, but Jesus Christ, this is nightmarish levels of naivete. Absolutely nightmarish levels of naivete.
Please challenge me. Please challenge me.
Doing it right now.
Right? Like, I don't want to go in front of millions of people, get called a victim blamer, and not have a piece of information that I should have, but, like...
If you don't want to hop on social media and be called a victim blamer, in this particular scenario, maybe you shouldn't blame the victim. Maybe it would be a good idea to wait until a court document or something comes out. Maybe it'd be a good idea, instead of, impulsively jumping on this conversation immediately while it's super topical, maybe exercising a little bit of restraint would be the right thing to do here, so that you don't make things worse for a victim. If that is the case, again, I don't know if this person is a victim. I don't know if assault actually happened here. I just want to talk about the idea presented here, the idea that somebody cannot be assaulted orally, the idea that these scenarios cannot lead to somebody being hurt. I don't know all the specifics in the scenario. I just know what you're laying out here in this video, and what you're laying out here is naive bullshit.
I don't believe it. I don't believe it. It sounds like BS. Please challenge me.
Okay, so we are doing that, but there's another angle here that needs to be considered. I know I've said the whole there's another angle here thing several times throughout this presentation, but this one is something that needs to be considered. This video on Twitter has 236,000 views. Okay? 3.2 thousand likes. 768 comments. 520 retweets. There's another angle that has to be viewed here, and it's where we view this as Keemstar being a bad faith actor. We've deliberately viewed him as a good faith actor the entire time so as to deconstruct the argument as presented. But there's another angle that has to be considered, as I said. And that angle is that this is all entirely for the points on social media. Because these points effectively translate into algorithmic boosts that will mean when he eventually does do his video, he not only has that algorithmic boost behind that content that he's making for profit, but also he can use this video and say, I tried to ask for information and people didn't come forward with anything that changed my mind. I did my due diligence. I tried my best. These are also things that can happen here. This is what happens when we view this as Keem coming off in bad faith. And notice how, at least in my estimation, maybe I'm wrong, but when you view this as Keem coming off in bad faith, you don't get somebody who is legitimately victim blaming. You get somebody who's victim exploiting. You get somebody who's exploiting a conversation in order to generate Twitter hype, and in so doing, magnifies his own brand and his next video, which translates directly into dollars. I'm not saying that that is the case. I have no way of knowing. But if I view this as Keem being a good faith actor, there's 1,000 ways to deconstruct the problems with what he said, and hopefully I've laid out a few here. If we view it through the lens of him being a bad faith actor, this feels like grifting for cash. And I don't like either of the scenarios, because in scenario A, we're dealing with a severe naivete from a public media influencer, which leads to other people adapting these mindsets. And then in scenario B, we have all the problems with scenario A, and also this coming from a horrible place. And I don't think either of them are good. B is worse. B is definitely worse, but neither are good. And I think we've had plenty of conversation during this whole debacle about sometimes the options being just bad and bad, but not as bad. Anyway, what do you guys think? Let me know in the comment section below. Let me know in the chat. If you haven't followed me over on Twitch already, please go ahead and do so. I feel really weird promoting my Twitch and my YouTube and all that stuff at the end of this kind of video, but algorithms and shit. Anyway, as always, everyone, insert end of video tagline here.